Perfect. So thank you for the kind introduction, and good afternoon to everybody. I'm happy to see so many of you joining the session where we'll have the chance to talk about the function, the roles, and trends of science communication. And it's kind of both a pleasure and an exciting challenge to see such a mix of people here today, from PhD newbies just starting out to the pros who've been in the game of doing research and communicating about it for years. And of course, everyone else who's simply interested in the topic of science communication. So very, very warm welcome from my side. I really appreciate that we are not all in the same place in our scientific journey, because it means we can also share different views, questions, and insights at the end of this. And communicating science is a big task, and I'm excited to tackle it with such a diverse audience. However, there's only so much you can do in about 40 minutes. So my goal is to provide you with kind of a brief overview, get you excited about science communication, and provide you with some resources in the end of where you can get more information on the topic. And also, I was brief. This session is kind of an opening event for future webinars on science communication. So I also want to get you excited about those. And today we're going on a journey to understand mainly the what and the why of science communication, and finish with some basic insight regarding the how to do science communication. And our agenda will cover the basics of science communication, its crucial role and why it's important in today's society, and how we can use it as researchers as kind of a practical device for effective knowledge transfer. And with that said, I would say let's start with one of the most fundamental questions underlying this session. What is science communication? Or maybe even more basic, what is science? And of course, most of you are scientists, and I might not be telling you anything new. But to have everybody on the same page and to understand the challenges that science faces, I think it's a good first step to take. So when we look at definitions of science, in its broadest sense, science is a systematic approach for understanding the natural world based on observation and experimentation. It's about asking questions, testing hypotheses, and seeking to provide evidence. And because most of today's societies are largely based on scientific knowledge, science isn't just for scientists anymore, like in the old days. Science is basically for and affects everyone in our society. And that's where science communication comes into play, because science communication, as we will see later in this session, is kind of a bridge that connects scientific knowledge and discoveries to people's understanding of these knowledges, of this knowledge and discoveries, and also the application in real life. However, if we want to understand what falls within the domain of science communication, it is, I think, also important to know what is not within the scope of science communication. And science, as we've just seen, relies on transparency, empirical evidence, and also systematic study. And then there's non-scientific knowledge, which is mostly based on everyday wisdom that people kind of acquire based on their own observations in their surrounding world. And some examples everybody kind of knows are weather rules, like when the frog climbs the ladder up, it's going to rain. Or there's farmer rules. So in Swiss German, there's a saying, and I'm talking from Lucerne, that translates to, if Mount Pilatus has a hat, the weather will be good. And one other example of non-science is religion. And you might say, wait a second, there is religious science taught at universities, so religion should be a science or is a science. And yeah, that's the case. The science about religion can be considered science. However, religious practice is considered non-scientific, because it's not based on scientific methods, but rather is founded on a belief in a higher power, karma, or something else you want to believe in, or you have to believe in. And then there's this last area, which has become more and more of a disturbance, if you want so, or challenge, not only for us scientists, but for example, also for politicians. And this is labeled pseudoscience. And pseudoscience consists of statements or beliefs or practices that claim to be scientific and factual, but are actually not scientific at all. And you might be familiar with some of the most prominent examples, like the flat earthers or climate change denial, or also homeopathy. And distinguishing between what is and what isn't science allows us afterwards to not only define what falls into the field of science communication, it can also help identifying and pointing out non- and pseudoscience claims, which in turn can help to protect ourselves or everybody else in society against misinformation, disinformation, fake news, or conspiracy theories. So now that we know what science is and what science isn't, I'd like to turn to, for a lot of scientists, maybe more frightening part, and that is communication. And when we talk about communication, we are really talking about a certain way of connecting with people. Because communication, either in its direct form, which can be interactions and talks with other people, or mediated via different media channels, for example, tries to establish connections and relationships between people. And that is why at the core of it all, communication kind of requires at least two entities, someone to send a message and someone to receive it. And in the exchange, the sender and receiver, as we call them, are dealing with some kind of content. Whether the content is words or texts, pictures, or even only gestures, we are passing something from one side, the sender side, like an academic institution, to a receiver, such as a specific audience interested in something like quantum physics. And what we aim for at the end of that exchange, so to speak, the holy grail of communication, is to develop a common understanding about the information that has been shared between the sender and the receiver. So before we dive into the specifics of science communication, let's remember at the heart of it all, it's kind of the drive to share, to connect, and to understand each other. And that's what makes communication such a powerful tool, but also a very huge challenge. And when we bring this together, so science and communication, and shifting our focus to the core of today's session, we're talking about science communication as a specialized field within communication research. According to experts, there's an entire science to how we share science-related information and content. But you might ask yourself, what does that actually include? So science communication, following another definition that you can see on the bottom of the slide, includes all the ways we talk about scientific knowledge or work, no matter where it happens. And whether it's within the walls of universities and research labs or out in the wild where people are talking about the latest gadget or health advice with their friends or family. And as we are living in a world where new discoveries and technologies are produced with an increasing speed, connecting people, that's where communication comes in, connecting people with this knowledge and science in a meaningful way is super important. And as we've heard before, science communication tries to build bridges. And those bridges can be between researchers and the rest of the world. They can be on a meta level, between complex ideas and everyday understanding, and between the lab bench and the kitchen table. And with this in mind, I want to invite you to take a step back and zoom out with me and reflect on the role that science plays in today's society. We've already heard that it's super important, and today's societies largely function based on knowledge and technology. And if we do this, we will then be able to understand better why it is so crucial for science and researchers and academics to communicate. Because when you look at this, today's societies are so interconnected and are largely based on knowledge, that science plays a vital part in all of it. And maybe you need to brace yourself a little bit, because it will get a bit theoretical, and we're getting back to the practical things afterwards. But what you see here is a systems theory viewpoint on science. And I'm using this very simplified perspective to kind of illustrate that science is a continuously evolving subsystem in our society that is interconnected with other subsystems in our society. And in systems theory logic, these subsystems of society only exist as long as they keep on fulfilling kind of a purpose for society, as long as they provide something that the other systems and people living in our society can get out of it. And the systems in this graph are considered the most closely connected with science. And of course, those subsystems are then also connected to each other, but I try to keep it a little bit simpler for this webinar. And being closely connected also means that those systems are depending on one another and keep each other alive. So what that means, we'll see on the next slide, when we kind of try and understand how all of this works in order to not fall apart. Because science as a system essentially provides the essential knowledge, innovation, and technological advancements, which also affects people's everyday lives. And for the science system to function, it relies on support from its surrounding systems. First of all, it needs financial investment that can come from enterprises that expect new discoveries and technologies they can transform to sellable products afterwards. Another source of financial support is the political system that uses taxpayers' money to support science, like here in Switzerland, for example, where universities get money from cantons and students that pay fees and go to university. The science system also needs political backing, like the freedom to do research, which is basically a ground rule or a basic need in order to be able to provide knowledge. But the science system also needs regulations that create stable and reliable environments for researchers and institutions like universities. And in return, science can, for example, offer evidence that can guide and shape political decisions, or, as I just said, offer technological discoveries that help enterprises create new products. But even with all this financial and political transactions, science, like kind of every other system, requires more, and that is visibility and attention. Because the knowledge and new discoveries have to be kind of transported to the other systems, and the information has to get across to individuals living in the society and to the organizations that belong to the systems, like enterprises or political entities. And this is why media plays such a central role, because the core function of the media system as a subsystem in this model is to create publicity and to foster public awareness that is important for the exchange of information. Because without this awareness and without this transparency, there wouldn't be any exchange of information. However, that's not all, because none of this would work without one crucial ingredient, and that is trust. And trust in science as a system, trust in its methods, and trust in its findings. And this trust most of the time does not come easy, or just because we as researchers publish our findings. That's not enough to establish trust within society. So science actually needs to actively build trust. And one way to establish and maintain trust is through clear, consistent, and honest communication that aims to help people understand science. So people really have to be able to get to know science and to understand how science functions, how evidence is created, and so on. So science communication is not just an add-on or a nice to have, I would argue. I would say it's kind of a necessity. And it's how we as scientists ensure that science remains at the heart of society, and science as a system can actually work and live on. So we need to kind of build bridges that enable information that we as scientists create to circulate from one system to another. So the next question then is, how can these bridges be built? How do we ensure that the information can travel from science to the media, to politics, to every individual living in our society? And if we look at the past, there are basically three eras that we can differentiate. And each of the pictures here presents a different understanding of the role of science for society and stands for different ways of building and maintaining these bridges, which are then enabling trust. And first, there's the ivory tower. Most of you will have heard of this visual or metaphor, which stands for kind of a traditional or older view where scientists are seen as kind of an isolated entity from the world, engaging in their research with little outreach in their ivory tower. They don't see the outside, and nothing from the outside gets inside. So mostly there are no bridges at all, or very small one-way bridges, because actually in this model, scientists decide what society might need and what information is good and needed in society, and then they pump it out into the wild and into society. Next, the glass house metaphor, where the creation or the knowledge creation is a transparent process, or should be a transparent process. So everybody knows what happens inside, and people inside, so scientists or the science system, knows what is happening outside. However, having this transparency sometimes kind of hides the fact that looking in or looking out of a glass house doesn't mean we understand what's happening on the in or the outside. So the bridge is there, but the traffic that crosses the bridge is kind of limited, because there's specific channels or pathways that are missing in order to ensure a full understanding what is going on inside or outside of that glass house. And lastly, there's this concept of science as a marketplace, where everyone can browse what ideas and information science has to offer. And also everyone has the chance to engage in discourse. So scientists talk to lay people, to non-scientists, and non-scientists have the chance to approach, non-scientists have the possibility to approach scientists and talk to them, or make them aware what they might need. And this marketplace of ideas and concepts is based on a close exchange and dialogue. And within this understanding of science, we kind of lose the bridge idea because there are so many bridges that we kind of, everyone is on the same platform, because there's little or no gap between science and society. So we can't really distinguish between the both systems, which is good, but also poses a challenge as those boundaries kind of vanish. And it's sometimes hard to distinguish what is science and what is not science, and what is, or which viewpoint is more important, the one of the scientists or the one that everyone or the society or non-scientists have on different topics. And these different understandings of science can be linked to the development of different paradigms of science communication. And the debate began with the deficit model and concepts of scientific literacy, where information, if at all, was kind of, I said it before, pushed towards non-scientists. So science decided, oh, this is important, so let's get it out there and make people aware of it, without even considering if the information might be useful or needed in society. Today, the focus has shifted to these models of public engagement with science, where non-scientists are seen as kind of equal partners in science and are invited to participate in scientific debates and policymaking. And especially the latest approach of science and society kind of implies that there has to be a steady and heavy exchange of information between science and society. And this exchange mostly consists of the exchange of information and knowledge transfer in the form of communication. And that's where communication comes in. And when we see that this last understanding is largely applied today, so science and society is basically the gold standard that we should try and follow today, we can next have a look at, well, if there has to be communication, who is actually responsible for keeping this exchange and transfer of knowledge going? So we are asking, what are the stakeholders and players in this process? And this illustration from Koeniger shows how science communication kind of works and who is responsible for building those bridges. And you'll see scientists in blue, and we'll get into that during the last part of today's session. Sure, scientists are important, but also there's a whole network of communication and other professionals who try and clarify, explain, and interpret scientific messages and get them across to non-scientists or to society, basically. And it's good to be aware of those professions, groups, and the role they play in the process of knowledge transfer, because it's important to know that they can provide kind of support for us as scientists or a platform. So you as a scientist or researcher can successfully deliver your scientific discoveries to the right audience. And what I want to do is I want to briefly take a closer look at those professions that are linked to the scientists. Starting with a group that ideally, it's not always so easy, but ideally this group should be very easily accessible to scientists. Because PR and press officers usually work at the communication or press department of scientific institutions or universities, and they are in their profession and role at the university responsible to share new discoveries from scientists and help create messages that are suitable for the public or the media. And as they know how the media works and what the needs of different audiences, so from students to the general general public to policymakers they are responsible to make or to take the complexity out of science. So they have to kind of strive to make it relatable and newsworthy for these different audiences. And depending on what audience you're targeting or they are targeting, they have to make a smaller or bigger effort in reducing complexity of the scientific knowledge. So their role is basically being translators and storytellers who should ideally ensure the hard work you're doing at your institution doesn't just stay in the academic bubble, but makes its way to audiences through different media and communication channels. And those are what we are talking about now. So another group that plays a central role in communicating science are those media professionals and those media outlets and channels. And they bring science to people's homes by making complex research and results even more accessible and engaging because they have to take into account that they are addressing a very general and wide public and audience. Therefore, they need to screen the available information, whether the information comes from scientists themselves or from universities or the press offices at the universities. They screen this available information, and if they find the information suitable for their audience, they use these discoveries in their everyday news and conversations. And a particular group that is becoming more and more important are science influencers on social media. And they are often very passionate individuals and not professional science journalists, but they kind of have a passion for science topics. And they use platforms like Facebook or X or Instagram or TikTok to also discuss scientific topics and make these topics accessible, especially for younger audiences. And lastly, there are other actors like educational institutions, museums, policymakers, enterprises, and so on. So this is a very diverse kind of group we're talking about. But what they share is they try to make scientific knowledge applicable by turning it into action, such as NGOs like Greenpeace or PETA try to use scientific knowledge and turn it into action and get people engaged with the topic. They can also turn it into action in a way to do policy, for example, such as the Federal Office of Public Health does. Or they can try and achieve direct social or real-world impact on people, like museums and knowledge centers that try to educate people and inform them about specific things like biology or transportation. And as we've seen, the landscape of science communication includes a variety of perspectives and professions. So scientists, journalists, PR professionals, a lot of different entities that have to work together or that we can kind of account for when we do engage in science communication. And each of these players has a unique role in how and why they try to do knowledge transfer or convey scientific information to individuals in our society. So being aware of these stakeholders and their role in the process of knowledge transfer is one of the keys to successful science communication, I would say. And for the last part, I already pointed out of today's webinar, I want to focus on one, or if not the most crucial key to success in science communication. And for that, we are going to talk about us by asking ourselves as scientists, how do we as scientists effectively communicate our research. And of course, and I'm aware of it, there is no one size fits all answer. That would be too easy anyways. But based on my own experience, talks I had with colleagues and people, journalists as well, and also research on science communication, I kind of want to address some important points that you should be aware of and consider when doing science communication. Especially if you want to get people's attention and get them excited for your research, which is basically the pathway to them developing interest in what you do and then maybe reporting on it. So we do not have the time to go into much detail on these points. And of course, this list is really not exhaustive, but I think those might be the central points that are of interest to you. And some of these points, when I'm informed correctly, are addressed in the upcoming sessions in this webinar series. So you can kind of think of what we cover today as also kind of a teaser for the upcoming events. So taking the first step is to understand who are we actually talking to as scientists? Who do we want to talk to? Are we reaching out to our colleagues? Are we trying to reach media professionals and talk to journalists? Or are we trying to get our information across to the general public? It's important to be aware that every audience has their own expectations, and every kind of communication ideally should anticipate and manage these expectations. So it's really expectation management we're doing. And knowing the expectations then kind of guides or influences how we create our messages and how we approach communication. Knowing who's listening or reading makes all the difference when it comes to what or which audience are we actually talking to. And you can start by looking at conventional ways to audience segmentation. So what you see on the left side, based on their socio-demographic background or maybe their lifestyles. You can also ask yourself, what media do they use? So what media do people, or does a younger audience that I want to get to, because there is important information for them, what media outlets do they use? Are they online junkies, or are they old school newspaper readers? No offense to those of you who still read newspapers in printed form. And there's even more specific guidance for Switzerland and Germany offered by researchers of the Science Barometer. And based on their study, we know that there are different audiences that differ in their engagement with science. So there are really science enthusiasts that are super interested and that dive deep into very complex issues and use a lot of resources, also very complex information to get to know a topic better. And then you have the active participants who engage very critically. So the critically interested, they try to see the pros and cons, the advantages, but also especially the risks of certain technologies, for example. You have those who are supportive of science and the scientific discovery, but they are not really deeply involved. And you can see this is basically also the largest part of society. So 42%, the study found, are belonging to these passive supporters. So they're basically okay with science and on good terms with science, but they are also not really looking for new information on what scientific discoveries there are. And then the ones who might need a little extra spark kind of to get them interested, so the disengaged people. And each of these audience groups has a specific demographic and media use, which I can't outline today, but if you're curious, you can go. This publication also, it's from Switzerland, but it's also available in English. And you can really see that they use also specific media formats. They're interested or reachable via different channels, and they have a specific socio-demographic background. The point here is that by understanding our audience, we can then tailor our efforts to inform or engage or even inspire people about the stuff we do as scientists. And once we know our audience, we need to meet them where they are. I just said that these different groups have prefer different media outlets or channels to inform themselves or stay informed about scientific discoveries. So when you know your audience, you can kind of try and get your information to the channels where those people are, meaning the media channels these people use. Are they watching TV? Are they reading newspapers? Are they even reading scientific magazines or journals? Or are they preferring to go online? Because choosing the right channels is kind of key to getting our message across. And together with an understanding of the complexity of the information you need to get across, and the knowledge you have about your audience and the channels they use, you can then go ahead and tailor your message that fits the requirements of your channel. For example, postings for social media need to be significantly shorter than a press release from the university's communication office. So the ability to get very complex information across is very limited for social media. So you might need to consider going the extra mile and trying to get it to the press first, or you have to create a video that explains what is happening and people can then use that. And you're going to hear a lot more on this in the webinars to come, I think. But if you're curious or need some inspiration, I think, or I thought it might be good to bring this. There's a lot of information available on different blogs and even scientific journals like Nature report on examples of successful science communication stories. So there's so much out there. You don't have to necessarily invent the wheel again yourself, especially when you're at the beginning of your career. You can really have a look at those examples and get inspired and use those examples and see if they worked good or not so good with specific target groups or audiences, to then apply this knowledge to your own research if you want to get it across to people. And two last things I want to address today are points that kind of often get lost or that need some initial effort or time investment in order to make your future life as a researcher that wants to communicate with audiences, in order to make this life easier. And these are developing routines and continuously trying to learn and adapt your existing routines. And that means that effective communication is more than just getting it right once. Effective communication is kind of a habit. Developing and that's why developing and establishing routines for sharing your research helps you navigate these diverse settings and stakeholders that your activities should reach. But more than that, it can actually save you a lot of time if you have an effective routine, what to do in case, and that's what I tried to summarize on this slide. I tried to summarize my routine in case I publish an article. And this is only an example, and maybe you have different outlets that are important for you, but you can, for myself, I distinguish between the kind of must-haves and the nice-to-haves. So when I publish an article, the must-haves is things that are considered academic profiling. So the publication should go into your CV. You have to put it on academic databases like ORCID. When you're working at the University of Lucerne, there's this research information system where you have to put what you have been producing throughout the year, which then gets to the university website. So this is like the organizational, institutional, career-related academic profiling side. And then there's the scholarly communication side that is more about networking and knowledge exchange. And there are a lot of possibilities, like professional networks. So most of the journalists or scientists that might be interested for professional networking, you can reach via LinkedIn or X. There's academic networks like ResearchGate that you can choose or not choose to create a profile on, but this also helps with outreach and becoming visible for other people. And then there's this part, outreach and engagement, where you can post things on social media or you get media inquiries, but this does not always happen. And you have to be aware that you have to invest a little bit more time and effort in creating messages for social media, but it's nice to have, and it's on my radar. And whenever I have something published, I think, well, is it possible to create an interesting story out of it? So that is basically my routine, and everyone creates their own routine, and maybe you need to adapt it over time, based on also what other networks come into play, or you need to consider for your work. And it's important to hashtag and mention your institutions, because that is basically how you then can help the press officers or PR experts in your communication department at the university to kind of see you, because there's so much happening at universities and institutions that they kind of also lose track, or maybe sometimes they just find something because they have people already on their radar. So you can really get visibility when you rightly tag or mention your institutions. And the last point, and then I'm finished for today, and I hope I'm still in time, is we also need to, or you as a researcher also need to be willing to continuously learn and to be ready to kind of tweak and improve these routines that I just mentioned based on your own experiences you make with science communication, or you get new insights and feedback from others, and you should be able or willing to continuously learn and adapt accordingly. And sometimes it's necessary to leave your comfort zone and get in front of that microphone or that TV camera. And that might be frightening at first, but luckily there's help. The SNSF, I'm not sure if a lot of you are aware of it, they offer a very well-known media training course that is open for researchers from Switzerland. I think this year it is on the 7th of June, or sometime around that. And also the Swiss Academies of Arts and Science regularly publish reports and recommendations for science communication that can help you to get a better understanding what science communication is, how you can improve it, what needs to be done, and what others do, basically. Yeah, and with this, I'd like to conclude this little excursion into science communication. I hope it was informative for all of you. And maybe one last thing before I conclude, maybe try to remember that every time you communicate science, you're not just like trying to pass on or push out knowledge. You are actually trying or should try to spark curiosity and understanding. So with that, thanks for joining today and for your kind attention. And I'm looking very much forward to your comments, remarks, experiences, and questions.